Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, hosted by the Organization Development and Change, Workforce Education and Development Program at Penn State. This is a monthly webinar series presented during your lunch hour. My name is Yuling Chang, and I am a PhD candidate in Workforce Education and Development Program. We also have Sakun Giri, who is the moderator for Q&A session. Today, we are presenting how remote and hybrid work environments are impacting employee engagement, presented by Dr. Masirov. In terms of the interactive format for this webinar, please use the chat feature in the Zoom platform. If you have any questions about the presentation, please use Q&A feature on Zoom. You can see Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. The Q&A session will be at the end of the presentation. Our online Master of Professional Studies in Organization Development and Change are designed for professionals who need the skills and knowledge to effectively lead change in their organization. Furthermore, there is a PhD program in Workforce Education and Development with a concentration in Human Resource Development and Organization Development. Our program has created continuous monthly webinar series with experts around the world. Today, our presenter is Dr. Masirov. Dr. Rob received his PhD in Workforce Education from Penn State in 2020. He currently works for the Army as the Chief of the Customer Service Branch at Tobyhanna Army Depot in Tobyhanna, Pennsylvania. Dr. Rob has 18 years of IT leadership experience in education and federal industries. Now, please join me in welcoming our speaker. Dr. Rob, the floor is yours.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, depending on what time zone you are. Thank you for having me here today. I'm happy to kind of discuss a conversation and a topic that I'm really passionate about. So I'm going to kind of share a little bit about my research when I was a PhD student. I'm going to share about some of my experiences that I have right now. And hopefully this information is going to help a lot of you out there today. So I'm going to start off with what is engagement. So engagement is a topic that has a lot of different definitions, and it's a common word, but I don't know if everybody kind of is on the same page with what they think it means. So from the scholarly research, there's two common definitions. So the first is by Kahn, who says people employ and express themselves physically, cognitively, or emotionally during role performances. And the second one is a positive, fulfilling, work-related state of mind characterized by vigor, dedication, and absorption. So what that means in kind of layman's term is that engagement is when an individual is emotionally invested. So whether it be with their work, with their organization, it means when they care. So why is employee engagement important? So, it's important to the organization. It's also important to the employee. From an organization standpoint, you end up getting higher customer reviews. So when an employee cares about the work they do, the employee, the customers feel it, and they end up having a better experience and sharing that better experience. That kind of translates right into customer loyalty. So when somebody cares about what they do, you feel cared about as a customer. And that makes you want to go back to that organization and give that organization your loyalty. It lowers rates of stress and burnout. So stress and burnout have a lot of different kind of negative issues associated with it. So stress and burnout can cause employee turnover. It can cause poor performance, health issues, dependability. So there's kind of a lot of reasons that you don't want stress and burnout for your employees. And lastly, it helps with creativity and innovation. So when somebody's engaged and care about what they do, they're always looking for ways to improve. So they're not just doing a set of tasks, they're trying to accomplish something which enables people to be more creative and innovative with their work. In addition to the organization benefits, employees also receive some benefits as well. So again, the reduced burnout is good for the organization, but it's also good for the employee. So nobody likes to feel burned out, can have negative health issues on yourself, makes you not enjoy what you're doing. Just burnout is not good for anybody. Life satisfaction. So when you're engaged with what you do, you believe in your work, you believe in the organization, you're proud of it. It makes you feel like you're fulfilling something in life, and that's a good feeling as well. And lastly, psychological and physical health. When you're engaged, you're just more likely to be healthy because you're not worn down, you're motivated, and you end up feeling better about yourself overall. So engagement is really important to an organization and to an employee as well. So what kind of helps create engagement? So it's this word, and we know kind of what it means, and we know why it's good, but where does engagement come from? So there's a few different frameworks out there that kind of try to figure out where they think engagement comes from. So the first is the needs satisfaction framework. So basically that one is they want to have meaningful work, they want to feel safe, and they want to have the resources to do it. So if they have what they need to do something that's meaningful in a safe environment, that's kind of where they feel engaged. There's the job demands resources model. So that's kind of similar with the resources and the duties, but basically you want to make sure that you have everything you need to do everything that you're assigned. So if you have more than what you need to do what you're assigned, you're engaged. If you're given more tasks and more work than what you have resources, it's really difficult to be engaged. Social exchange theory. So that's where you return positive actions with equally positive actions. So if the organization treats you well, you're going to treat the organization well. Organization is loyal to you, you're loyal to the organization. So it's kind of whatever you get, you're reciprocating it back. And lastly, there's the satisfaction engagement model. So organization's meaningfulness and the employee's value to that meaningfulness. So that is where the company that you work for, or the organization or the team that you're part of has a really important purpose. And you believe in that purpose, and you can see how the work that you do ties into the success of that purpose. So that gives you meaning, that gives you energy. So that's kind of what that model is focused on. So for my research that I did, I used the social exchange theory as the framework for my research. And so what my research kind of found is that in an organization, you have 4 major relationships: peer, supervisor, your customer, and yourself. And so all day, every day, work and everything is about those relationships. You're interacting with those areas, you're giving and you're receiving. So if you're receiving more than you're giving, you're feeling engaged. If you're giving more than you're receiving, then you may not feel quite as engaged. And so it's a combination of relationships, which is important, because somebody could say, I have a bad day with a supervisor, but I have a great day with a peer. So you can still go away feeling engaged, even if one of those relationships wasn't ideal. So having those combination of relationships is really important from what my research found to employee engagement. So here's kind of an example of what that would look like in real life. So, you're at work and a supervisor sees an employee and is like, oh, hey, I have this work, this customer needs something, it's really important to us. I'm selecting you because I know you're really good at it. Can you please do this work? So the employee says, yep, I understand it's important. I'm going to do it. Well, I know my friend over here has done this before, or they have information that I need. Let me go talk to them. hey, I was assigned this this work to do, and I know you've done it before, and how are the family doing? And do you mind giving me a little bit of a hand and kind of give me some direction with this? So your peer says, yep, that's awesome, congrats, good, everything's good, and here's information that you need. The individual completes the work. Once they complete the work, the customer's there, and the customer's like, thank you so much. This is really helpful. I really appreciate what you've done. The supervisor's there, sees the work, says, awesome job. I knew you would do good, and thank you for making us look good. And then the employee feels good. Okay, good. My supervisor's happy. My customer's happy. My peer is happy. I'm happy. This was a good day. I feel engaged. So with telework, this is just kind of a basic example, but from my experiencing, telework doesn't have as many of those extra interactions. So it can oftentimes be a little bit more task oriented. So the supervisor sends you an email, hey, there's something that needs to be done. Employee needs information from a peer, so they might send them a chat, hey, I'm working on this, can you give me this information? The peer might not be right at their computer, or they might be working on something else, you can't really tell. So you message them, and an hour later, they get you the information. So now you're kind of stressed, you're running a little bit behind than what you want, but you get the work done, and then you get it to the supervisor and say, hey, sorry, it took a little longer, I couldn't get a hold of this person, and here's the work. Supervisor says, thanks, job's done. So, kind of the exact same task, but in a lot of teleworking situations, you may not have those personal interactions that turn a similar task into a more engaging engagement atmosphere. So you can kind of, like, this example was more generalized, but one of the examples that come to mind is, a restaurant, right? So if you call a restaurant and says, I'm ordering this food, can you please deliver? They make the food, they deliver the food, and they give it to you, and you eat it, and you're all good. But if you go in person, you're at the restaurant sees you. Oh, hi, welcome to the restaurant. Looks like you have your kids. Hope you guys are having a good day. I remember you. You usually like to eat XYZ. So you have that relationship, that interaction. They bring out the food. You tell the waitress, wow, this food is great. You see the cook, hey, good job. This is some of the best food I've had. So just that physical presence allows for a little bit more extra interactions, and those extra interactions build relationships that can help with engagement. So I'm going to talk here a little bit about Telework Benefits. And so one of the things that people can do is, if you have any personal experiences with benefits that you've seen from telework, you can put them in the chat, and I'll kind of look at there as I share some of the benefits that I've seen. So from an organization, there is a reduced cost of providing workspace. So if everybody's on site, you have to have air, electricity, seating space, everything. So when there's not as many people in the office, it doesn't cost as much to house them. So larger pool of candidates. So when you're hiring a position, if you can only hire from people who live in the area, that's obviously got a max of what qualified candidates there can be. But when you're hiring for a complete remote work position, you can pretty much hire anybody in the entire world. So that's something for the organization there. And decrease downtime related to weather and illness. So there's people who would take off work because they had a sore throat and they didn't want to get people sick, but they still felt better, good enough to work. If you're teleworking, you don't have to worry about getting other people sick. You don't have to worry about you getting sick. If you're feeling well enough to work, you can work. So that might reduce that. Or if you're having car trouble, doesn't matter. If it's winter and you have snow because you live in Pennsylvania and there's a foot of snow out there, you can still work even when there's a foot of snow out there. For the individual, reduce cost and time of travel. So you don't have to travel there as much, especially with gas prices today. That can be a helpful thing. Larger selection of organizations to work for. So, a lot of people don't want to pick up their families and move. but you may want a new job. Well, now if it's a teleworking position, you can work for the organization you want, doing the stuff that you want, because you have a larger pool of jobs to choose from. Increase safety and health. So one of the engagement models specifically say safety, right? People want to feel safe, and when they feel safe, they have the ability to be engaged. So, you know, that health and safety of kind of being in your home can be good for some people. And then more flexible hours in some cases as well. So looking here at the chat, looks like Stephanie says better work and life balance. So that's really, really helpful, where people who are teleworking feel they can also be there for home things. Can increase productivity. So different people have different work styles. At home, there's maybe less distractions than at work. Maybe you have better resources at home, so that can help with that. Katie says more opportunities to field employees to participate in activities that were traditionally only available to home office workers. So ERG events, socials, the COVID environment made our organizers of these events become more inclusive with our employees that can come in person, or that can't come in person. Awesome. So when everybody has access to technology, distance and stuff isn't a detractor from who can attend and who can't. Jesse Winters, benefits personally experienced, able to manage work life. So I think kind of some of the, excuse me, some of the things that I'm seeing there is that it gives people more control. So if you're at home and you're teleworking, you have more control of your work-life balance, you have more control about what you participate in. So it kind of empowers the employee there. So some really good things there. All right. So in addition to some of the good, there's also some challenges. So one of the things that you see there on the left, I'm not sure if anybody knows what that is, but that is a device that you can plug into your computer, and it makes it look like your computer is being busy, but you can walk away. So some organizations have software that are kind of monitoring if your computer's active or idle. So when that special mouse is plugged in, it's kind of moving things the entire time, whether you're there or not. And from that monitoring software, the organization would say, oh, they're active, they're doing things, they must be at their computer doing work. So you can kind of see how many reviews there are just for those two examples of the devices, and I'm sure there's hundreds of different options to choose from. So the fact that there's people actively buying devices to make it look like they're working kind of shows some of the challenges that are there. And then I'm going to play a quick video here. So here's an example of a commercial that kind of demonstrates some of those challenges as well.
Welcome to Allstate, where everyone saves when they bundle their home and auto insurance. Isn't that right, Frank?
I saved 25%. Oh, yeah.
You protected your casa?
Sure did.
And the Frank tank?
You know it.
And now you're relaxing.
I'm working from home.
Sure you are.
All right, I see a lot of head nods. Let's circle back tomorrow.
You aren't kidding. Save up to 25% when you bundle home and auto with Allstate. Click a call for a quote today.
All right, so there are some examples. You know, with that Allstate commercial, that's an active commercial today. Like I think I saw it last night. And what kind of gets me about it is that looks like a supervisor who's on a Teams meeting or video conferencing meeting, and he's talking to some host about insurance, as well as laying out there in the sun. And then he's not paying attention, but he says, hey, everybody, I see nods, so let's pick this up tomorrow. So what kind of jumps out to me is that seems very normalized, right? So that commercial isn't like, this isn't a joke. This is a real commercial, and this is somebody who's doing this in real life, and it doesn't jump out as super crazy. So the fact that there are people out there that either do this when they're teleworking, or at least have perceptions that this occurs during telework, kind of shows some of the challenges with that. So looking at the chat there, I work from home, although I wouldn't change it. I feel way more than I ever have, and my employees feel the same. Curious if there are any studies, literature regarding burnout due to the ability with that. So I'll probably get to that question a little later at the end of the thing. But that looks like a good question there. And I kind of encourage people to just think about your experiences and, you know, have you ever been on a Zoom call and somebody accidentally turned on their camera and you can tell that they're not paying attention? I can think of that occurring many different times. So just kind of think through some of those challenges and you'll see that it can be difficult. All right. So bias recognition. So, so far, especially from a lot of the chats and stuff that I've seen, you know, there's kind of this positive feeling about telework that it empowers employees. It's good for work-life balance. This is a really good thing. So I want to kind of be open and honest with my personal experiences, because that can obviously influence how I present, can influence my perceptions and recommendations. So my personal experience is that telework has been tough. So one of the reasons it's been tough for me is managing staff who are teleworking is more difficult. So I used to be able to walk around, say, hi, how's everybody doing? Just the fact that I could walk into the room probably keeps people a little bit more paying attention. And so it just made my life easier. I could talk to people when I needed. I had a little bit more control as a supervisor. So, you know, we talked about people feeling empowered and feeling in control. Well, the opposite side of that, as a supervisor, maybe I don't feel as much control, and that can be scary for me. I also manage a hybrid team. So I have staff who cannot telework. Their positions don't allow it. They work physically with devices, and that can't be done remotely. So when that occurs, and I have both people, I have staff who don't feel valued, who don't like their jobs because they can't be done remotely, and they have peers who are teleworking at home, and they are much more critical of the people who are teleworking at home. So that creates some challenges. And then personally, I enjoy working with people. So I enjoy seeing their faces. I enjoy talking to them and interacting. And even though I am an IT geek for a living, I do enjoy that in-person communication. So for me, my personal preference is on site. And so in my role as a supervisor and kind of in my role as presenting on this, I wanted to make sure you guys were all aware of that, so I can separate my bias from kind of the data and the literature that's out there. So I don't know how many supervisors we have out there, but I have this little session here for Supervisor Therapy. So it's kind of hard for people who do have that negative bias to go through the rest of this presentation and see all the benefits and the good things that can be done, because you're still in a situation where it's a struggle for you. So that's how I feel personally. And if there's anybody else out there, hopefully this slide helps a little bit. But the important things to remember is that it's not all supervisors. So if an employee is not happy, if a supervisor doesn't feel successful, there's so much that goes into successful telework. And so we all have to be on the same page together to make this successful. So for example, telework positions should be designed for telework. When the pandemic happened, people weren't redesigning positions. They were sending people home with a computer and say, do what you can. That's not a position design, and that can create a lot of challenges. Organization rules and policies need to be established. So I work in a place that has a union. So there's things that I'm allowed to do, things I'm not allowed to do. And when we went to the telework and we hadn't teleworked before, that created a lot of new issues. And I did not have rules and policies that supported me or that I could reference to kind of work through this. I felt like I was on my own. Performance management changes. So I know how to evaluate certain things because I've done it for 15, 16 years. When people went to telework, I have to adapt. How do I tell when somebody's doing a good job versus a bad job. And I don't know if other people had this experience, but for the first year and even for the second year, people said, well, this has never happened before. This is a pandemic. So as long as people are trying, that's good enough for me from a performance standpoint. I have a daughter and she went to school and they weren't going to hold anybody back because different students have different experiences with telework. So they kind of lowered the bar a little bit because they were putting people in a tough situation. So as a supervisor, how are you evaluating that performance? Staff telework and training. So they may have had training for people, they may have not, but without that training and without developing those skills and just doing it, that could be a challenge. Technology that enables and encourages remote communication and collaboration. So when we started our telework, we had phones. We did not have a video conferencing tool at my organization. So that was a challenge. But as technology has emerged and they realize the need, that's gotten a little easier. And lastly, transitioning from reactive solution to a proactive strategy. So again, when it first occurred, everybody's like, well, I don't know what to do, and I don't think it matters because this is the first it's ever happened before. Nothing like this has occurred. So let's just get through it until we can get back to normal. And so I think for a long time, people were waiting for normal to come back, and they've kind of realized it's not. So that is a challenge, but it also allows you to kind of move on and say, okay, I have to make some different changes and plans to kind of move forward. So, I kind of talked about my research, and I've kind of talked about the challenges of telework and what involves telework. So how do those things come together to make some actionable items that I can give you today in order to help you with what you do? So employee engagement levels will be directly related to the quality of the relationships with peers, self, supervisor, and customer. So that's kind of the outcome of what my research was. So that means any events or actions that negatively influence those relationships will also in turn have a negative impact on engagement. So just got done talking about some of the challenges that teleworking and working remotely can have on those relationships. So where do we go from here? Well, we should look for interventions and changes that can help improve those relationships, which will then in turn improve engagement. So what are some of these things that we can do? So incorporate team building into your meetings. So this isn't one that I've actually done personally yet. It's something I heard somebody say and I really, really liked it. So the example that they had given is that their supervisor said, grab an item from around the house that has a lot of meaning to you and share it with the team. That's one way you can help people to get to know you better and connect with you better. So I'm going to try that out here. So I have a cup from my good friend Eileen. So when I graduated with my PhD, she gave me this, and this has a lot of meaning to me because I remember all the work that went into this and the support that I received from my family and friends. I also have this little Army guy. So I was in the Army National Guard serving in the infantry for a number of years. So when I went to boot camp, somebody got this for me, and it's a good memory now of when I went to boot camp and I was training in the Army. And so this has a lot of meaning to me as well. So just little things like that, being able to have a meeting and say, okay, everybody, let's go through and just share something from around the house. It's giving you a deeper insight to get to know me better, and maybe somebody else was in the military and now we have a connection that we can build from. So another suggestion is require daily collaborative work for employees. So I am not somebody who likes to mandate a lot of things. Forcing people to do things typically is not a recipe for success. But from my experience with a lot of my staff is they like the freedom that telework brings. And sometimes they go a little overboard with some of that freedom. And so you kind of have to reel them in a little bit to say, you know what, you are part of this organization, you are part of a team, your team relies on you. How do we make sure that we're working together as a team? And so you can provide making sure that employees, whether it be collaborative work or meetings, I don't suggest having tons of different meetings and calling it collaboration. but finding ways that people actively have to work with others in real time during the day. And so kind of the example for this is standing desks. So I don't know about you guys, but when standing desks first came out, I was like, as a supervisor, I had employees who requested them and I had to give them. And I was like, what is this about? And then years after working in an office, you realize it's not healthy and sustainable to be sitting down as much as we do. And that standing desks, even though you're kind of looking at it and be like, do I really want this? When you're forced to do it, you start to realize the benefits because you create healthy habits. So to me, a healthy habit is actively collaborating with other people. It's building skills, it's building relationships. And so if employees don't do that naturally, you got to find as a way as a supervisor to kind of build that into their everyday environment. Require the camera to be used for meetings. So right now you can see me, you can see I'm talking with my hands. You can tell that I'm engaged. I'm talking, I'm happy, I'm liking what I'm doing here. We could have people on this call that are sleeping. We don't know because their camera's off. And so cameras enable a lot of different things to occur. So nonverbal communication. So you can, again, see my hands, I'm engaged. And if somebody doesn't like what I say, if I see them on the camera, I can kind of see, you know, oh, they kind of do the eye roll and everything like that. So if we're trying to build relationships, camera helps enable better communication with the nonverbals and with active listening. So as I'm talking, if I saw heads going, yep, so active listening, they hear what I'm saying. All right, so perform scheduled one-on-ones with staff to see how they are doing, not what they are doing. So this has been a challenge for me. And as I kind of share some of these recommendations, feel free to put in the chat of some maybe the recommendations that you have individually. What are things that have worked for you personally? But I know for me as a supervisor, when I'm busy and I'm stressed and I'm like, okay, I haven't talked to this employee yet today. So I check in, hey, how are you today? What are you working on? Okay, everything good? So that employee doesn't always feel like I care. They feel like I'm checking in on them. Yes, I'm here, I'm working, and that doesn't build that relationship. So how do we transform those one-on-ones where it's more of a conversation, where it's more about building that relationship versus me feel like I'm checking in on them? So find ways to involve the customer that demonstrates the value employees bring to somebody. So one of the important relationships to be engaged is the customer. So I know for telework, you know, that's how you can have a relationship with your supervisor, and that's how you can have a relationship with your peers. But, you know, maybe you don't see the end customer as much. So one example is, you know, if you're in higher education, whether you're a teacher, whether you're an admin assistant, whether you're a designer, whatever your role in higher education, you're all there to help students graduate and better their lives. So something that might be engaging is to have, you know, the graduation virtually, where you're all kind of watching it and seeing how the work that you do is making changes in people's lives. Another thing is assess the root cause of the issues instead of making assumptions. So I know I'm guilty of this, where I try to contact somebody and they don't get back to me for 2 hours. So for that 2 hours, I'm like, okay, they're taking a nap. They're out in the pool. I don't know where they're at, and I'm assuming the worst. And so how do we make sure that we kind of look into the root cause of that? So, for example, one of the things that I have found with one of my employees is they have bad internet. So with the bad internet, it goes up and down a lot. And so now that I know root cause, I can take appropriate action. So it's still not an excuse. We need the employee to be productive, and just because their home internet isn't working, but I can at least have a conversation with that employee. And I know that it's not an effort issue. We can talk about like, hey, is there other internet options that you can do? Is there applications on the computer that are taking too much bandwidth that are causing issues? So we can have the right conversations versus making assumptions. And lastly, you know, developing teleworking skills on the team. So just because somebody's teleworking doesn't mean they have the skills. And just like any kind of performance, we should try to be bettering ourselves and improving ourselves. So I'm looking here at the chat a little bit. And it looks like people are sharing some really good suggestions. All right, so I'm kind of going through there and see Stephanie and Eileen doing some stuff. So some very good suggestions there. So I encourage everybody to kind of look through there that the things that I've experienced, other people have different experiences. So how do we learn from each other and find stuff that works for us? So I'm going to kind of jump back in again to maybe some hard decisions. So again, I am a supervisor, I'm a leader in the organization, and I care about my staff and I want to empower my staff and make sure I have those good relationships. But I'm also accountable for a bottom line. I'm accountable for hiring and making sure our work gets done. So what are some hard decisions that could come from this? So one hard decision is an emphasis on telework may not be the right strategy for all organizations. So what I mean by that is my organization that I work for is a manufacturing organization. They do welding and building and painting, and that is how they make their money. So even though we offer telework at our organization, making it a big point of our organization is maybe not a good strategy because it disconnects a lot of the people who can't telework because their jobs is in manufacturing. So, you know, making sure that your telework strategy aligns with your organization strategy, I think is important and can create some tough conversations. Not all employees have the competencies to be successful teleworkers. So yes, you can provide training. Yes, you can try to build people's skills, but there's also competencies that are required to be a successful teleworker. And not all individuals may have those. So in those cases, you know, do you force them to be on site? Do you allow them to be the telework, but you have to manage them? And maybe they end up getting poor performance ratings and get fired. So that can be challenging because when we kind of, with the pandemic, moved everybody to teleworking, we weren't looking at competencies. We were just looking at the safety and health needs and moving people. So now we have to kind of evaluate, you know, what are the competencies needed and whether or not people have those. Making changes for employees will generate negativity at first. So this is an experience that I have, right? So we've had people who are teleworking for a year and a half, 2 years, and now we're realizing this is going to be the new norm. So we want to make changes to make it successful long term. Well, change is hard for people, especially when they've been doing it the same way for a number of time. So, you know, that change can be hard for people, and you kind of want to say, well, I don't want to make this change because I don't want to make people mad. But now that we understand and know more about teleworking and we know it's going to continue, we want to make sure we're setting ourselves up for success. And the last one is kind of more of my thought based on data and research. And so, is engagement as important or worth the effort for remote staff? So what I mean by that is when people are remote, certain positions, you might need a set of tasks to be performed. So if they're not interacting with people and they don't have to have a lot of relationships with people, they're just doing tasks, they are probably a little bit more replaceable, a little bit easier replaceable, doesn't cost as much. So you can kind of look at it as like a contractor, right? So organizations have been hiring contractors for years. And for a contractor, you may not always be looking to engage a contractor. They're not really a full part of the organization. They are there to accomplish a set of tasks, and you pay them to accomplish those tasks. And so with teleworking, I just kind of got done seeing examples of, I need to schedule one-on-ones with them. We need to have team building events. We need to do all these things. So at what point are we investing so much of our resources into trying to engage them that the replacement value of them, of, you know, them coming in, them doing the work, and if they aren't fully engaged and they find another job, we just find somebody else to come and replace them. So that's not a fun topic, but it's something that I think leadership needs to keep in mind because, you know, there isn't necessarily a right or wrong. It's trying to make sure that we're doing the right thing for the organization. So research opportunities. So when I was doing my research, it was just 2 years ago. So 2 years ago this month. And a lot of the stuff for engagement, I did not find that when I was doing my scholarly research. So there was not a lot of research out there on the influence of telework on engagement and how telework differs with engagement. Not that telework hasn't happened before, but with it happening so much so fast, it does leave a lot of opportunities for people to kind of research what is going on, what does the data say, and how do we kind of move from there. So something that I personally would love to research if I had the time and stuff right now is engagement differences of employees who worked on site with the company and had to remove remotely versus employees who have been remote the entire time. So I have not yet hired a new staff that's remote completely. Every staff I manage was on site, and now they're either telework or they're in a hybrid model, or some of them have to stay on site. So I have never onboarded somebody that didn't work physically at the organization at some point. So how are those employees different versus the people who have been there at least at some point? What are the skills and competencies of supervisors who have engaged telework employees? So again, I work in a production environment for the federal government. So a lot of our supervisors have been there for 20 years, 30 years. And now we all have teleworking staff. So what skills are needed? So the skills that were needed to manage those people on site might not be the same skills and competencies that are needed to manage them remotely. So do supervisors, maybe somebody was a good supervisor in one environment, but doesn't have the competencies to be a good supervisor in another. So kind of going through that, what does a good supervisor look like in an engaged environment? And lastly, what is the influence of new technology tools on engagement? So as an IT geek, I found it really interesting, right? When we first moved telework, we didn't have MS Teams, we didn't have OneDrive, we didn't have those tools that allow us to both work on the same document at the same time. It was kind of like I do my part, I email it to you, you do your part, you email it back to me, I look at it for the changes. And I know I personally felt an increase in engagement when we were able to work together on things real time. So I know that technology does play a role in enabling engagement. So what kind of role does that play, and what tools might have a bigger impact than others? So those are some of my experiences. I kind of, again, shared my bias that it has been challenging for me, but hopefully you can also see that I see a lot of opportunity. I have a desire to want to improve and be better for my employees. I want to do a better job building relationships with my peers and employees and customers. And so I provided some ideas how to do that, and hopefully these have been helpful. So now we're going to go ahead and transition into the question and answer section, and Sagun is going to go ahead and facilitate that.
Thank you, Dr. Rob, for your awesome presentation. So we have a couple of questions here, and I'll begin with the first one. The question comes from Gabrielle. She asks, I work from home. Although I wouldn't change that, I feel I work way more than I ever have, and that my employees feel the same. Curious if there are any studies, literature regarding burnout due to the ability to be on all the time, given the lack of boundaries.
Yep. So that's a great question. I do know with burnout, right? So a lot of what kind of makes burnout possible is where your demands outweigh your resources. So when you are giving more than you're receiving, or you're being asked more to do with not the number of resources, that's where burnout comes from. So to avoid burnout, you have two options. You increase your resources, or you decrease the demands that are put on you. So things that you can do to increase your resources would be more automation. So if you're being the same amount of tasks, how do you do those tasks more effectively so you're not working as often? Maybe it's a prioritization that you're postponing some of those tasks. So anything you can kind of do to decrease the amount of work coming in or the effort that you're doing. Not from a literature standpoint, but from a personal standpoint, I know that we've had conversations about setting boundaries, about what time of days that we'd be accessible and what kind of not. So that might go to the organizational processes and rules that we kind of talked about, that as an organization to say, okay, there's no expectation that anybody's going to answer an email or phone call after 6 p.m. Eastern time. And if you kind of set that as a rule, then it's easier for you to set those boundaries. So it might not be your fault. It might not be your team's fault. It could be the organization needing to mature to a standpoint that says, okay, as an organization, we want that work-life balance. We don't want to burn people out. So this is going to be a rule and policy that we put in place. So I think there is a number of different ways that you can approach that. And I think that all of them start with a conversation and kind of to that relationship, setting the boundaries, talking, getting on the same page about what you want as a team. So great question.
Thank you, Dr. Rob. Another question comes from Dr. Donahue, which is, I think, a funny question. He asks, which Jiggle product do you recommend?
So I could go back through and look. I actually did test one. I don't remember the name of it. But as an IT person, I did not do it as a supervisor. So this was not Matt being a micromanager. I had another supervisor who came to me and said, my staff's machines are never showing as idle, but they're also not responding to me. Do you have logs that you can do? And I'm like, well, it's not really logs. And I don't like to, in IT, we don't like to play big brother and look. We feel that should be a supervisor and employee conversation. But I did test one of those, and it's kind of cool from a technology standpoint, pretty ingenious where, you plug it in and it's moving around. There are things that IT can do now to kind of see some of those. So I've also been involved on the IT side, right? That says, how do we use IT to determine if people are using technology to avoid work? But my only issue with that, right, is that that's not building relationships. So if we are serious about improving, we can't be spending all of our time trying to spy on people or determine if they're doing a good job or not. We should be spending our time and our efforts on building relationships that are going to be productive, because that's the only way it's going to be scalable and sustainable. So great question.
Thank you. Another question comes from Eileen. What is the process strategy of pairing or grouping people for daily collaboration?
Yep. So that is a really good question as well. So for me personally, I have 27 direct reports. So having one big work session is not very feasible. In addition to my direct reports, I have people have different specialties and stuff like that. So we do have groups. So I have an IT support team, for example, and we are divided into tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 based on the type of work that's being done. So that's one way to separate people, is that they're all kind of doing the same thing. The problem that you have with doing it is it's very logical, because there's already kind of that existing boundary. But if that's all you have people collaborate with, you're going to find that those other relationships start to suffer. And when those relationships suffer, you're not going to have, be nearly as productive or have the different viewpoints. So I'll use an example, use an example. So at my past job, we used to have a yearly team building event. And so throughout the year, I would try to help relationships with my team, but I don't really help relationships with our team with other teams in our organization, right? So they have another supervisor. We're all part of the same organization, but they have a different supervisor. So I can only control as a supervisor what I can control. So my team was pretty close knit. But then we went to these organization-wide team events, and people would start talking with somebody outside of their team, and they'd be like, oh, wow, I didn't know you guys were working on that. We're working on something similar. How do you guys do it? Oh, wow, we never thought about that. Okay, that's awesome. So we're going to take a little bit of that. You know, we're going to have a meeting on this next week. Do you think you could come and share what you do with that? So there's a lot of value to having collaboration with people who you might not think are a logical fit for collaboration. And so I would say that when you're dividing people into groups and you're trying to build those kind of work teams, that you diversify them and you change them up. So that way you're kind of getting constant different perspectives that are involved. You're building multiple relationships, cross teams, cross boundaries, and you're building ultimately a larger pool of network for your staff to interact with. So ultimately, at the end of the day, I would encourage you to make those groups diverse. So to do that, if you are a supervisor, you may have to talk to other supervisors and say, let's set something up between our teams, 2 people from your team, 2 people from my team, once a week where they work on XYZ. So it is going to be a challenge to kind of go outside of your area of control, but I think ultimately that would be beneficial as well. So great question.
Thank you. I know that you touched upon the question from Alia, but can you expand on the question a little bit more? The question is, what are the competencies for telework? What recommendations are out there for screening for those competencies ahead of time for fully remote organizations?
Yep. So good question. I don't know the answer from a scholarly perspective. I can kind of share from my experience that I've helped some people post jobs for telework. And when you're posting jobs and you're going to have interviews, people have reached out for my expertise on saying how, what things should I be looking for? Now, they did not actually know I had a PhD in workforce education, so they were asking me from a technology standpoint. So they're like, Matt, you're an IT geek, and I'm going to have somebody who works remotely. They have to have computer skills. They have to know how to set up their own network. They have to be able to do basic troubleshooting because we can't send an IT person there. So what things do I need to be thinking about technology-wise to make sure they have the skills? But that doesn't address the competencies. And so as people are looking to kind of answer this question, I think they're going to the quick, easy stuff that says, must be good with a computer, must have a good network internet connection, and they're kind of hitting the top of the top of the thing there. So for the competencies, some of the things that I see is that people need to be self-driven. So you do not have people who are looking over your shoulder. So you need to be, driving yourself. You don't need to be having to be told what to do every minute of every day, and you need to be able to kind of initiate and try to do some things on your own. I would say that you need people who are self-disciplined. So we have the mouse that jiggles, right? So there's people who want to kind of skirt the system and use telework for non-productive ways. So what kind of person, has the self-discipline that says, what, I'm tired this morning. I don't feel like getting up, but I have to because I have work to do. And I don't need my boss to check on me. I'm going to do this because I know it's the right thing to do and it's something I need to do. I think that good communication skills are important. So when you're in person, I think communication is a little easier. So I don't know how many people have ever done a training, but all the trainers that I know, they love in-person training because they feel that they can be much more proactive and productive as a trainer, because it is harder to kind of communicate things remotely. So people who have good communication skills are able to communicate with others, communicate out, and work effectively, even though there might be some additional barriers than what they're used to from being in person. So kind of those self-driven things, self-discipline, communication, technology skills can be taught, work styles. I think for work styles that I think it's important that some people, at least my experience, that a lot of people who like to telework have some ability to work independently. So yes, we want collaboration with people, but I don't know if it's going to be 8 hours a day of collaboration. So you're going to be able to kind of work independently, and then you have your scheduled collaboration meetings to do that. And some of that could be because your teammates are on different time zones. So they're not going to be there from 8 in the morning till 4 o'clock. They might have a 2-hour meeting where you collaborate. So the rest of the time you have to kind of be able to work independently and be effective that way. So those are some of the ones that come to mind. But I think that would be an excellent research question, to add to as one of those opportunities for future research.
Thank you, Dr. Rob. So we have one last question. We have time for one last question. The question is, I am a business owner. What is the cost of engagement initiatives for a business? What are your thoughts on
that? Excuse me. So that's a great question. Oh, I didn't go on the right pipe. Sorry. So that's a great question. So my brain kind of operates that same way. So as a supervisor, I do know how much time I'm investing in trying to engage people. And it is a lot of work. It is a challenge. And so again, we kind of talked today about how if you're going to be working remotely, you need to be scheduling one-on-ones with your staff. You need to be going to schedule team building events. You need to have your staff require them that they collaborate with each other. So we're kind of putting in these extra steps to enable people to interact more. And those extra steps could eventually be pretty costly. Like I said, I have 27 direct reports. So if I have a 15-minute conversation, a one-on-one conversation with my staff, it'll take me an entire day to get through all of my staff with a 15-minute conversation. And if they're on site, maybe I kind of achieve some of that less one-on-one or kind of happens, automatically. So I think as a business owner, anytime you want your employees to be engaged. A lot of the benefits of engagement are customer focused. So I would say if you're a customer facing positions, it is more important that somebody be engaged than maybe some non-customer focus or positions. So if somebody's managing the server in the background, maybe you don't need somebody that's highly engaged to manage that server. Maybe you can outsource it. Maybe you can get a contractor, or maybe you have an employee, but you just don't spend as much time investing in whether or not they're engaged, because if they leave, you find another person to do that. But if you are a customer focused position, the data, the research really shows that your customers know when they're interacting with somebody who's engaged. And if they're interacting with somebody who's disengaged, that's ultimately going to hurt your bottom line because it's hurting your customers. So as a business owner, I would suggest looking at each position separately, start looking at the data of how much it costs, and then looking at staffing options of, depending on the position and the duties that they have, which people do you invest kind of engaging and which people do you look for other ways to keep them involved.
Thank you, Dr. Rob. Thank you so much for your knowledge and expertise. Back to you now, Abby.
Thank you, Dr. Rob. Thank you, Sagan. It was a pleasure being with you today. On behalf of our OD&C Workforce Education Program, we hope you think this webinar is helpful. If we did not get to your question, please send us an email or reach out to the presenter directly via email. For the future webinar, we would like to hear your feedback on today's webinar. Please take a survey using the link in the chat box. It takes less than 3 minutes. The webinar team is taking a little break in July and August. We will be sending out a notification when we are back in September. You can also find us on all of our social media platforms, such as Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter. Again, thank you everyone for joining us today, and we hope to see you soon.